So we're going to pick up this afternoon at the tail end of the conversations, and then we're going to start and end in the letters. They have his own words, and it really just comes out in there how much he loves everything about life, actually, but in particular his relationship with the beloved. So to start, I'm going to go ahead again and go with another Hafiz poem. This one's called "I Saw You Dancing." And you'll know exactly why it's perfect for a meditation retreat or a silent retreat. I saw you dancing last night on the roof of your house all alone. I felt your heart longing for the friend. I saw you whirling beneath the soft, bright rose that hung from an invisible stem in the sky. So I began to change into my best clothes in hopes of joining you, even though I live thousands of miles away. And if you would have spun like an immaculate sphere just 2 more times, and then bowed again so sweetly to the east, you would have found God and I standing so near and lifting you into our arms. I saw you dancing last night near the roof of this world. Hafiz feels your soul in mine, calling for our beloved. I love that notion. I remember when I first started my practice, my meditation practice. I was in India, and it just God seemed so imminent. I thought that any moment I would have His vision, that any moment I would have that unitive experience with Him. And I remember in those early days, I would go into the shrine to do my practice, and I really, honestly, inside had this belief that this could be the time that I could see the beloved, that this could be it. And sometimes I would meditate for hours at a time in that expectation. And of course, after about 8 or 9 years, I started to understand, wow, I've got a lot of work to do. My faith isn't quite there yet. But in this poem, that idea that if you had just circled, just spun 2 more times, that would have been it. And I always try in my practice. We should always try in our practice and know and have that expectation that this can be the moment where we will be unified with the beloved. It doesn't have to be something that happens later. I think one difference that I felt in when I began working in Vedanta circles from the fundamental Christian circles that I was in growing up, that is, in growing up, all of the good stuff of God was to come after I died. After I died, I would be immortal, and after I died, I would be in heaven, and after I died, I would be happy. And everything was always over there. And religion really, really just came alive to me when I realized, no, it's now. I'm with God now, and I will never die. I will never experience death, that I am forever free and forever infinite. And that the purpose of life is to see God, is to have that unitive experience, that union with the beloved. And if you don't manage to do it while the body's walking around, certainly at the point of death, it will happen for you. When the body falls off and you're still there, you'll get it. You'll be like, oh wow, check this out. I'm still here and the body ain't. That's amazing. And then you go home in that light. It's such a beautiful concept. And this is where our brother is living. This is how he's having his days. And he says that it's by this short and sure method that he exercised himself in the knowledge and love of God, resolving to use his utmost endeavor to live in a continual sense of his presence, and if possible, to never forget him again. That is all of it. If you want the philosophy of Brother Lawrence, that is all of it. That he exercised himself in the knowledge and love of God and made his utmost endeavor to live in a continual sense of the presence, and if possible, to never forget him again. All spiritual practices, all worships, all rituals, all songs, all poems of the divine, everything written in every religion is for that purpose alone, that we might never forget the presence of the beloved again, and that we will live in a constant moment of the delight of his love and his understanding, his grace. That they're having first considered severally the things his office required. I'm sorry, let me start at the beginning of the sentence. That when he had thus in prayer filled his mind with great sentiments of that infinite being, he went to his work appointed in the kitchen, for he was the cook to the society. And there, having first considered severally the things his office required, and when and how each thing was to be done, he spent all the intervals of his time, as well as before as after, in prayer. That when he began his business, he said to God with a filial trust in him, O my God, since thou art with me, and I must now, in obedience to your commands, apply my mind here to these outward things, I beg you to grant me the grace to continue in your presence, and to do this, and to this end, prosper me with your assistance, receive all of my work, and possess all of my affections. So we see that in bringing it into our real life, that the moment we sit down to do our work, to do these outward things, as Brother Lawrence says, that our first thing is to train the mind to be at the feet of the Lord, to train the mind to be enraptured in the love of God, and to formally say, be here with me, don't let me forget you, and let everything I do be for your love. Let everything that I do be full of these wonderful, wonderful impregnations of love, of grace, of compassion, of kindness, of gentleness, of freedom, of love, and to never forget it, and know that in all my work I will never love anything more than I love you. So protect me in that way. Don't let me see things in my senses. Don't let me see things in my mind that will beguile me, that will pull me out of this quiet and tranquil center. And that prayer comes from the depth of his soul because of how tentative that place can be. You see, in the self, in the inner soul, God is God. There is no change in the Father. You know, there is no change in God. He does not move. He does not have a will. You know, the Father is isness. So if he had a will, it would be just like that. It would manifest instantly. There's no time for the divine. He doesn't live in time, space, and causation. There is no past and there is no future for him, for her. There is this eternal now. And that's where we experience eternity, is by coming to understand that the reality of our experience, and this is a little philosophical to wrap a mind around easily, but meditate on the notion that the sages say there is no past. That's a concept of mind alone. And there is no future. That's a concept of projection alone. You have only and will only and have ever only experienced now, this moment. And if you can let go of the baggage of the past and let go of your projections for the future and come to experience the moment as it is, then you will see the perfection in it. Then you will experience the presence of your beloved. There's a sage that taught me that our past, basically, when we experience things, objects of desire in the present, we intrinsically know ourselves to be immortal, and we want objects and things of the senses in the world, the material world, to also share that forever nature. And so when it's something that can go, that can be lost or passes in time, we grab it and we put it into our mind, into our memory, in an attempt to share our eternity, to share our immortality with something that's temporal. And so it goes into the mind. And the problem when we put something into our mind is that becomes a lens through which we view the present moment. And when we view the present moment through that lens of our attachments in the past, it creates a sense of lack. we forget our perfection. We forget our contentment. We forget our wholeness. And when we see a lack in the present, we want to manifest that thing again. We want to manifest that pleasure again. And that requires us to make a plan, to project a future that will allow us to manifest a lost desire again in the present moment. And so all of us, most of the time, in what they call our bondage, and literally the chains of our past and our future, because we spend all of our time bouncing back and forth between our attachments to the past and our desires of the future, that we never experience the now as it is. The now is full of expectations, which creates disappointments, which creates, just a gritty, uncomfortable place to be. So we're always bouncing back and forth. And that's why the Buddhists have made such a practice of being present now, mindfulness, the whole tea ceremony, everything that they do in that tea ceremony, 100% of the focus of the tea master is on every little detail. There is not any other thought going on in his mind than what is being done at that particular moment. And to train the mind in that way will allow you to experience God and have the natural bliss that is your nature, the natural omniscience that is your nature, the natural immortality of your nature, then becomes apparent. But when you are distracted, you can't be called back to the self because the self is unchanging. It's always perfectly content, perfectly still, absent of will, so that it never flickers, it never glitters, it doesn't make any sounds. So once you step off of that center into the senses or into the mind, there's nothing to call you back but the remembrance of grace. And the remembrance of grace then will allow you to set everything down and retreat again back into the presence of God. And I say back into the presence of God because it has to be understood that God cannot be objectified, like we talked about this morning. God is not something you can go get. It's something that you have and are. And to find that, to experience that, which you always run into philosophical problems when you talk about these things, because they're not things of the mind. They're not things you can talk about. But we talk about backing into God because he's not an act of will and he's not an object that's separate and apart from you. And like we said this morning, he's your face. He's like your face, you just know it's there. You just accept that it's there and you run your life knowing that you have a face, though you have never seen anything but a reflection of it. So you trust that's real. So with God, it's very much the same. We back into the love of God. We back into the embrace of God by backing away from all of the particulars that we're attached to, that we're holding on to. So he says, as he proceeded in his work, he continued his familiar conversation with his maker, imploring his grace and offering to him all of his actions. Okay, he says all of his actions, and he means all of his actions. All right, so if you're at the DMV filling out a form to get your license, you are doing that as an act of worship for the beloved. So you're filling it out neatly, you're filling it out truthfully, you're being very focused on it. And when you pick it up, you're not handing it to a DMV clerk, you're handing it to your beloved dressed as a DMV clerk, and you're handing it over is your act of worship. So in everything that you do, and this is the extreme mindfulness, everything that you do in a day is an act of worship, done as an act of worship, not to get a result for it, not to get caught in the cycle of that past and future where everything has a cause and effect. So you're not doing it to get your license. You're doing it for its own sake as an act of love and offered to the beloved, to your beloved. So everything that you do, and meanwhile, as he says, that conversation is continual. Every experience that you're having while doing it, every thought that's running through the mind as you're writing out the form, all of it is a shared experience with divinity, with God, with love. and all of the gifts that he gives in that situation, the inspirations of love, the warmth of the heart, the teary red-stained eyes of someone who loves from the heart and from the soul, are the gifts. They are the natural response of God in his recognized relationship with you. When he had finished his work, he examined himself. How have I discharged my duty? How did I do? If he found that he did well, he returned thanks to God. If otherwise, he asked pardon, and without being discouraged, he set his mind right again and continued his exercise of the presence of God as if he had never deviated from it. There's a couple of real nuggets in there for us. Just that notion of self-awareness, self-examination, we call it discernment, to always be on guard that the pollutants, the impurities, and we won't name them. There's only two of them, and they're the same thing. The impurity of me and mine. Those are the only things in this world that are impure, things that are motivated by me and mine. They are the things that disturb the mind. They are the things that collect objects as attachments. They are the things that create desire. They are the things that put the shackles on our wrists, that keep us working in that cycle of causation over and over and over and over again. So purifying the mind always of me and mine, and always checking to make sure that the seeds are not sprouting in there, that they're not coming to fruition. And if they're not, you give thanks to the Lord. Beloved, thank you. You know, I love one of the things we read this morning when he would do something wrong, he told God, he's like, you know, in my condition, that's all I can do. I can never do anything good. You know, the seeds of my ego, this space that I've created for me that's separate and apart from you, can never produce good. All good comes from you. So thank you for your grace that you've allowed it to go well. And if it hasn't gone well, he does not, shall we say, trip out over it. He admits, wow, that would have been better if it didn't happen. I'm sorry. I'll do my best not to do it again. And then it's gone. It's gone. Why? Because he believes, has faith in the love of God and the forgiveness of the divine. His reliance is on grace. When we don't trust grace, we feel the need to apologize again and again and again, and we carry guilt with us, and we carry shame with us. Those are meaningless attributes. They have no place in the spiritual seeker's experience. When you live in the presence of infinite grace because of the love of our beloved God, there is no room, there's no need for a continual sense of, oh my God, oh, I'm so sorry, oh, I'm so horrible, oh, I'm so bad. We know the grace of God. We accept the grace of God. We know that there is no other way for us, that we cannot in any way earn it or achieve it or reach it, that it is a gift of the beloved's own accord. We know that, and we live accordingly. We apologize. We bow our heads and know that it's grace. And because of that grace, we never feel the need to mention it again. We don't let it get held back. And it's very important, because that cycle of guilt, that cycle, it will break you down, and it will keep the fault in your mind. And when you keep things in your mind, they manifest. You do them again. You have to get those ideas of me and mine, however they manifest, out of the mind. They cannot be in there in any form. Gone. And it is only grace and only love and only presence of the divine that will allow you to do that, because the mind clings constantly to the input of the senses, clings constantly to its own ideation, and feels a desperate need to maintain a sense of separateness, a sense of ego, a sense of being, a sense of free will, you know, which for someone in the presence of God, a sense of free will is vulgar. What will could I have that would be better than the beloved will? What idea could I have that is better than the beloved's idea? So this sense of free will becomes even a vulgar idea. It's like, no, I have surrendered everything including my sense of will, my sense of independence, my sense of freedom. I live in and of and for the divine only. And the great joy of that we'll get to, because he touches on that here in a little bit. He says, he was never hasty nor loitering, but did each thing in its season with an even, uninterrupted composure and tranquility of spirit. Okay, what he's pointing there is the state of mind that has no attraction and no aversion to things. He could do the most menial task and be perfectly satisfied in it, or he could do the most difficult and painful task or dirty task and be completely content in it, because his experience was of God in both of those experiences. And so he had come to that place of equanimity. The man of steady wisdom is what the Bhagavad Gita calls it. Someone who has become so content and so established in the presence of God, who has all of their joy and tranquility and contentment and satisfaction coming from that presence of God, that the things of the senses are distant to them. It is not their mood is not a condition of circumstance or a condition of environment. It is freestanding. They have no desire. No desire. They need nothing else. And quite often, especially in the West, when we talk of being desireless, we're like, well, then how does anything get done? What, am I supposed to just turn into a dead piece of wood and sit here and do nothing? That's a complete misunderstanding, because you are not a piece of wood. And so if you have no desires, you're not going to manifest a piece of wood. What are you? You are love. You're the image of God, right? So you are pure love, pure intelligence, pure being. And when you do nothing of ego, what will manifest? Pure love, pure being, pure knowledge. So you'll look like a Jesus. Jesus was somebody who never had a thought other than God, who never was apart from the beloved, you know. No, there was a danger of it at the end when he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You know, that separation where it felt like that, but it's impossible to be separate from God, impossible to be separate. So he had never the need to hurry up and get things done, and he never had to experience laziness where he was avoiding doing anything, because he did everything in its season, as it came to him, as it was necessary. There's a conversation with Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj with one of his students, and the student is asking him, well, what about things that take some effort, that you have to exert yourself to do? And Sri Nisargadatta says it's the same with them. When effort is necessary, effort will arise. You do not need to be the driver of it. God is the doer. You are manifesting God. You are a window. Your highest ideal is to become a window through which God can be seen. That's the highest ideal of living. So they don't see a person who's dull and doesn't move and doesn't do anything. They see the light of love. They see the light of being full, tranquil, unperturbable, infinitely patient, infinitely kind, always helpful, and always saying the right thing. That's what manifests. I'm looking for an opportunity to share it. And I know I did this in class 2 years ago, so forgive me for repeating myself. But this is one of the most helpful things, and one of my favorite scriptures from the Bible. Everybody knows it. It's 1 Corinthians 13, right? Verses 1 through 8. And I start on the one where it describes love. He says, love is patient. Love is kind. Love has no jealousy. Love does not swagger. Love has no pride. Love is not immodest. Love does not look for its own advantage, nor is it stirred to anger. Love does not keep account of evil done, is not happy over wrongdoing, shares the happiness of the truth. Love is all sustaining. Love is all faithful. Love is all hopeful. Love is all enduring. Love never fails. And the power of this verse comes when you understand how to use it. This is a description of your beloved. This is a description of God. God is love, according to 1 John. And here we see what that means. We have this ideation in our mind that God is tallying our sins up there and holding us accountable. Ah. Here we see that one of the primary characteristics of manifested love is keeping no record of wrongs, keeping no record of fault. He doesn't follow you around like, you've done that 12 times. What makes you think you're going to be able to succeed now? That's not love. God keeps no record of wrongs. So let me read it and put God in place of love so we get this understanding. God is patient. How much we count on that. God is kind. God has no jealousy. God does not swagger. God has no pride. God is not immodest. God does not look for his own advantage. God is not stirred to anger. Well, that's an interesting one. God does not keep account of evil done. God is not happy over wrongdoing. God shares the happiness of the truth. God is all sustaining. God is all faithful. God is all hopeful. God is all enduring. God never fails. Now, there's some pieces there that you can take as axioms to build your life on. To know this, to be the truth, to accept this, anytime you approach the beloved in any condition you find yourself in, at any point in your life, you can know this to be true, that you can walk into the arms of the beloved at any time, under any condition, and find this response. And because of that, and because you are created in the image of God, it's a great practice to put this on your mirror in the morning. And when you wake up and you're sitting there brushing your teeth and noticing your new wrinkle on the left side of your eye, you say to him, I am patient. I am kind. I have no jealousy. I do not swagger. I have no pride. I am not immodest. I don't look for my own advantage. I am not stirred to anger. I do not keep account of evil done. I am not happy over wrongdoing. I share the happiness of the truth. I am all sustaining. I am all faithful. I am all hopeful. I am all enduring. I never fail. And to hold that true in our minds and hold that ideal within our hearts all the time, that is the presence of God. And that's what manifests when we get our ego out of the way, when we understand that it is God that is the doer, that free will was an unnecessary vulgarity of ego, and we allow ourselves to be what we have always been, which is divine, divine in our nature. He says, I renounced for the love of him everything that was not he, and I began to live as if there was none but he and I in the world. What a wonderful idea. Again, that notion when he says, I began to live as if it was just he and I in the world, did that mean that he just walked around and bumping into people because he assumed they weren't there? No, that means, of course, that he saw them in the eyes of everyone. He looked through the eyes of everyone at God and saw his beloved looking at him from every direction, under every circumstance, in every condition, and always reacted accordingly. I can tell you, experimentally, do the experiment. When you're standing in line and you're talking to the cashier, pretend, if it's pretense for you at this point, that you see the vision, that you see God looking out of their eyes at you. And then talk to them as if you're praying, in the same mood that you would pray. Talk to them. How are you today? And I can tell you, your world will change in a moment, because you will see everyone that you talk to in that way respond in that way. People know when you talk to their soul. People know when you don't see the surface that they're stuck in, the identities of body and mind. They know when you're looking at their soul, and they will respond in kind. It is a natural and normal and overwhelming response. You know, the first time I was looked at that way was by a nun in India, Pravrajika Mokshaprana. It's a mouthful of a name, but that was her name. And she was the first person to ever look at me not as a man, not as all the things that I thought of myself. but her eyes went all the way through mine, and I knew, and I felt the nakedness of her gaze. I knew that she saw me as me, the eye that is the reflection, all the way back there. And it was the most amazing experience to be looked at that way. The gentleness that was imbued in it, the trust that it responded with in me was amazing. And I began to practice that. I began to try and do that. And of course, mostly pretending, but that's the power of imagination. You imagine it and it becomes real. Everything in imagination, if it's held consistently in the imagination, eventually manifests in the material world. It comes out. That's the first act of creation. For at all times, every hour, every minute, even in the height of my business, I drove away from my mind everything that was capable of interrupting my thought of God. You see, this even though that teaching all falls into one line, like we started with, that I'm going to be in the presence of God always. That's the whole of his teaching. Yet the practice of that, the realization of that, wow, does that seem like something that's so far out and so unattainable? I mean, I can't even sit in the shrine with the picture of my beloved Jesus in front of me and not forget him. I'm sitting there trying to worship in my mind, and I find myself thinking about what I need to get on the grocery list. It's just such a horrible habit that we've established, because that's all it is. You see, the body and mind, they call it the wheel of samsara. Your body and mind, your mind in particular, and this is an interesting idea, your mind is an organ that secretes thought. That's all it does. And every thought that occurs in the mind is directly related to the previous thought. So you have this illusion of being free. You have this illusion of thinking that you can think everything you want to think. But the fact is that the mind is secreting thoughts according to what the previous thought was, and according to the conditions of all of the other thoughts that have gone through there. And it just continues. And there's this idea that if I don't get up and make myself go to work tomorrow, I won't. If God's the doer, I got to remind him to get me to work. The fact is, if your ego is removed, your body and mind still know what needs to be done, because they're on the wheel of samsara. They're rolling along, and they're just going to roll along doing what needs to be done. And what you come to understand is that is independent of you, that you ultimately are the eyes of the divine, that your will and the will of the divine, once they have united, carry on and watch a body live out its life until that wheel stops running, until that cause and effect meet their end, as it were. And in that, we find our contentment, we find our fulfillment. We don't have to go out and beg of the world for our happiness, for our fulfillment. We can break the curse of the Garden of Eden. We no longer have to till at the earth, because we have no desires to attain, no desires to acquire. We don't have to work for that vacation. We don't have to work for that house. We don't have to work for that car, because our contentment is found within. And we're now free. We're now free to watch the world from the vantage point of love and manifest that. But when we are faithful to keep ourselves in his holy presence and set him always before us, this not only hinders our offending him and doing anything that may displease him, at least willfully, but it also begets in us a holy freedom, and, if I may so speak, a familiarity with God, wherewith we ask, and that successfully, the graces we stand in need of. In fine, by often repeating these acts, they become habitual, and the presence of God rendered, as it were, natural to us. And it took him 9 years, he said. It took him 9 years of practicing this before it became natural to him. And that's why. Why? Because the mind, like I said, it's the wheel of samsara. It's just the wheel of cause and effect. And the more that the thought of God is put on the wheel, and the more the ideas of surrender and being in the presence of God, the wheel begins turning of its own accord into the harmony of the divine will, into a harmony with God's manifestation, with the purpose and purpose, that's a word you can't use in philosophy, but the purpose of the universe, the manifestation of God, the manifestation of the beloved. And when things are in harmony with that, then there is this inner divine freedom, because finally you are one. And what does it mean to be one? Well, that means that the voice of the conscience and the voice of your will are finally the same voice. You don't have to sit there and fight with your conscience anymore. You've come to realize after all these years that beloved conscience was you. And it was asking you to do what you really wanted to do, not what you thought you wanted to do. And that argument between the good and the pleasant becomes resolved. You see, when we do what is pleasant, we get trapped. When we do what is good, we're set free. And so in every moment, consider how it's going to feel tomorrow. If I do this today, how will I feel tomorrow? Because the effect of what you do will play out tomorrow. And so if you do that, in time, you'll be divinely free, because the wheel of cause and effect will let go of you, because you're living spontaneously in the moment, in the presence of the beloved, and manifesting the divine will. So he's talking about that here. And he says, if you continually pick the mind up and put it back in its place, pick it up, put it back in its place, pick it up, put it back in its place, eventually it's going to learn how to ride the bike without training wheels. Eventually it's going to happen. So we count on that, and we keep working, and we don't get discouraged. We don't give up. We just keep getting up, dusting ourselves off, saying, whoops, sorry about that. We get back to doing it again. And here he says, when I thought of nothing but to end my days in these troubles, which did not at all diminish the trust I had in God, and which served only to increase my faith, I found myself changed all at once, and my soul, which till that time was in trouble, felt a profound inward peace, as if she were in her center and place of rest. Okay, and I'll read the previous paragraph here to give a little bit of context to this. He's talking about the previous 10 years before the presence of God had become habitual for him. He says, such was my beginning, and yet I must tell you that for the first 10 years, I suffered much. I suffered much. The apprehension that I was not devoted to God as I wished to be, my past sins always present to my mind, and the great unmerited favors which God did for me were the matter and source of my suffering. During this time, I fell often and rose again presently. It seemed to me that all creatures, reason, and God himself were against me, and faith alone was for me. I was troubled sometimes with thoughts that I believe I had received such favors was an effect of my presumption, which pretended to be at once where others arrive with difficulty, at other times that was a willful delusion, and that there was no salvation for me. So he's talking about that mind when we know our lower self, and our lower self is what we identify with. There's nothing but pain in there. I can't do this. I want to do that. I shouldn't do that. Oh my God, I've done that again. And round it goes. And that name of Satan, that the accuser, raises its ugly head inside, and we're constantly bringing ourselves down because we're replaying that tape, right? That tape of shame, that tape of failure, that tape. We don't let go of our faults because we don't understand love, because we don't understand the nature of God, because we don't trust the size and immensity of grace, the infinite depth of the well in which we can throw all of our belongings, on all of our sins. We don't know that. And so we suffer. And you will suffer in spiritual life in the beginning for the first 10 years, as it were, because you're constantly living in the presence of an ideal. You're constantly living in the presence of a perfection. And you will feel dirty. You will feel broken. You will feel unaccomplished. You will feel all of those things. And there's a reason. because the beloved wants you to set it all down, including those feelings. And grace is how he wants you to do it, to know that there is no need for you at all. There is God, there is love, and we together will take care of everything. Don't worry. Keep going. Don't stop. And he says if you do it, it's not necessarily gradual. And quite often the sages say this, that it's like turning a light on, even if that room has been dark for 10,000 years. If you light a candle in it, boom, the room is lit. And they say this spiritual experience, this unitive experience, is very much the same way, that 30 seconds before it happens, there's no indication that it's coming or that it's going to happen. Boom, it happens. And he says that here, like we just read. I found myself changed all at once, and my soul, which till that time was in trouble, my soul for the 10 years up until that moment was suffering with self-hatred and with shame and with guilt and with fear and with understanding its damnation and all of those things. He said, but at that moment, at that precise moment, it felt a profound inward peace, as if she were in her center and in her place of rest. And the soul feels that way because the soul is that way. The soul comes to know, I am not this flirting, changing mind. I am not part of this ever-changing, unstable, insecure world. I am an absolute. I am an eternity. I am an infinity. I need nothing. I am free. I am free. Ever since that time, I walk before God simply in faith, with humility and with love, and I apply myself diligently to do nothing and to think nothing which may be displeasing to him. I hope that when I have done what I can, he will do with me what he pleases. As for what passes in me at present, I cannot express it. I have no pain or difficulty about my state, because I have no will but that of God, which I endeavor to accomplish in all things, and to which I am so resigned that I would not take up a straw from the ground against his order, or from any other motive than purely that of love for him. Wow. To come to a place in life where one could say that in guilelessness and simplicity, beautiful. It is the reason we are reading about him 500 years later. What a wonderful, wonderful thing. He's come to the place where he knows that his will and the divine will are not different. There's no longer a box of ego that he has to preserve where he can exist and God doesn't bother him. He never wants to do anything that God wouldn't do. Not because of the strict renunciation effect, like, oh, I can't do that, can't do that. No, it's because he has discerned and understood that he doesn't even want to do that. That is a craving perhaps of the body, or a craving perhaps of an old habit, or the craving of a misunderstanding mind, but it is not his. He is not the body, he is not the mind. He is the soul, the very image of the beloved, being reflected in the material world. He is that, and because of it, he's free, and blissfully so. I keep myself by a simple attention and a general fond regard to God. This, for some reason, has stuck itself to my very center, this notion of when you approach God, you should have this general fond regard for God. I love that, because it's not a big ebullient, wow, I love God so much. It's nothing like that. It's just this simple matter of fact, I'm just fond of you, God. I just like you. I like to be around you. I just like to think of you. I like to do things that are pleasing to you. I don't know why. You're just cool. I just like you. Nothing huge, no big grandiose actions of achievement and marvel. They may come, but they're not necessary. It's just having that general fond regard for God, which I may call an actual presence of God. And here he says an actual presence of God, because for those first 10 years, you have to imagine, you have to pretend, you have to live as if and pray as if. And at some point, you're going to realize it's not as if. You're going to realize that the imagination was the absence of God. You're going to realize that the imagination was the happiness of the world, that the imagination was a sense of free will, and an imagination that was somehow valuable to you. And now you wake up and you realize that which is real is this unchanging presence of the beloved that has always been there and will always be there, unlike anything else you have ever enjoyed or touched or loved in your life. This alone endures. This alone is forever. And he's saying to us, don't wait until you're on your deathbed, breathing out your last breath and knowing that you're not going to hear another inhale. Don't wait till that moment to realize that all things material go away, all of them. At that point, be fully aware that that part of you which is watching the final breath is the part of you that will watch the body fall away, is the part of you that will see the light of the divine, finally free from this anchor of a mortal flesh, this anchor of delusion and confusion and suffering and pain. And that's why the scriptures say that the wages of sin are death. Because what are the wages of sin? The wages of sin are using the body as your identity. That's who I am. And so that's who I fulfill. When the body wants that pleasure, it gets it. When the body wants that pleasure, it gets it. When the mind wants that, it gets it. You know, we spend our whole lives worshiping, literally. And this to me is the only idolatry. The fact that we think that the body and mind exist and we worship them. We worship them by giving them sex, by giving them wine, by giving them pleasures, by listening to their every whim and need, by literally going to work 8, 10, 12 hours a day to fulfill the pleasures and desires of the body and mind. You see? And at this point, when it falls away, if you are still identified, if on your deathbed you identify with the body and you feel it dying, you will experience death. You will be convinced that you are dying, and the fear of death and the loneliness of death will overcome you. And that is not the experience we want. So while we're living and while we're healthy, we need to become aware of that part of us that watches us breathe, that part of us that is watching the mind, that part of us that is watching the eyes and listening to the ears, but that part of us which is itself unaffected by all of those things. And how do we know that? Because that eye, which has been looking out of your eyes for your entire life, has remained the same. Can you not see that? That even in our older age, that I, the experience of me, is the same as when I was 5, is the same as when I was 14, is the same as when I was 25, even though my body now has nothing in common with what it was when I was 5, or when I was 8 or 15. And yet that I endures and remains. That is the soul, and that is who you are. And that soul is love. That soul is God. That soul is the beloved, and you are forever in that company. And to come to know that is to be free from the wages of sin. And you will watch a body die, and you will watch a body fall away, and you will be free, and you will see the oneness of all things. That's why he says here, he says, the King, full of mercy and goodness, very far from chastising me, embraces me with love, makes me eat at his table, serves me with his own hand, gives me the key of his treasures. He converses and delights himself with me incessantly in 1,000 ways, and treats me in all respects as his favorite. It is thus I consider time to time in his holy presence. This is the promise. After your 10 years of effort and suffering, through which you purify the mind and soul of this idea of self, this idea of me and mine, in the end, you will sit and have God himself feed you at the table, appreciating you and delighting himself in your company and being with you in 1,000 different ways. And you will simply enjoy, simply eternally, infinitely enjoy that that eternal comfort. And you are his favorite. There's this wonderful story. It occurs in the Bhagavatam, which is another not scripture, but one of the Indian texts. And in there, Krishna, who was considered an incarnation of God, is dancing with the gopi girls, who are kind of the perfect devotees of the Lord. They've lost themselves in love for him. And he's dancing in the forest with them. He's playing the flute and they're dancing around this fire. And something the author said that just charmed me to pieces was the fact that every gopi, every woman who was dancing around the fire with the beloved Krishna, each one of them felt themselves to be Krishna's favorite. And the fact that Krishna was infinite, it was true. There was enough of him for everybody to be his favorite. And so we can finally know, without an egotistic sort of way, that you are God's favorite, and it's okay to feel that way. And someday you will learn that that doesn't mean he doesn't have favorites in everybody that he looks at, but there's enough of that love to fill us all up to the point of favorite. So you can be God's favorite without diminishing anybody else. And actually, that's the truth. And that's the experience of being in the presence of God. That when you finally have this moment, I'm going to read it again because it's a wonderful moment. When we have this moment, and this moment is the promise, this moment is the promise of existence for us. It is the purpose of being alive. It is the purpose of going through this endeavor. The king, full of mercy and goodness, very far from chastising me, embraces me with love, makes me eat at his table. He serves me with his own hands, gives me the key to his treasures. He converses and delights himself with me incessantly in 1,000 ways, and treats me in all respects as his favorite. It is thus I consider myself from time to time in his holy presence. That is the purpose of life. That is the purpose of birth. That is the purpose of everything that we do. And it will be fulfilled. It will come to us. He says, as for my set hours of prayer, they are only a continuation of the same exercise. Sometimes I consider myself there as a stone before the carver, whereof he is to make a statue. Presenting myself thus before God, I desire him to form his perfect image in my soul and make me entirely like himself. That's the attitude of a spiritual seeker. To be surrendered to the point of a stone before the sculptor. No move to protect, no move to fix, no move to build, no move to achieve, no desire for anything than to be what you are being chiseled out to be. A complete surrender to the hands of the beloved, surrendering anything that would counter it or find its way against the current of love that comes to you and is yours. That is how it is and how it will be. And it's 3:00. So today, as you sit in your quiet, know that you are the beloved's favorite. And don't be afraid to feel that way, because you are. Sarvesham swastir bhavatu. Sarvesham shantir bhavatu. Sarvesham purnam bhavatu. Sarvesham mangalam bhavatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May there be well-being in all. May there be peace in all. May there be fulfillment in all. May there be auspiciousness in all. Peace in the world, peace in my life, peace in my soul. I'll see you tomorrow afternoon, 2:00.